Welcome again, everyone. We're recording so that folks who can't be here can watch later. Welcome again, everyone, to Luta Continua, Conversations on Building International Solidarity. My name is Rachel Ferran. I'm a program director at Community Justice Exchange. CJE is a national abolitionist organization. We support local grassroots organizing, targeting the criminal, legal, and immigration detention systems. We're so honored and humbled to have James Kilgore as one of our Building Community Power Fellows and to be supporting his work on this incredibly timely and necessary project. Before I introduce James, just a few quick housekeeping notes. Please remain on mute while the panel is going. I think you may be automatically muted. We will mute folks if you accidentally come off, but just asking folks to stay muted so we can all hear the speakers. We will have time for questions at the end. So if folks have questions come up during the panel, please add them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens, or you can just put them in the chat. We'll collect them and add them at the end. So without further ado, I'm so honored to introduce my friend and comrade, James Kilgore. James is a Building Community Power Fellow at Community Justice Exchange. He is the author of 7 books, including Understanding Mass Incarceration, which was the winner of a National Book Foundation Award for Social Justice. He drafted 4 of his 7 books during his 6.5 years in prison. He's also the director of advocacy and outreach for First Followers Reentry Program in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, where he lives. He's the father of 2 sons, the grandpa of 3 girls, and the life partner of African historian Terry Barnes. So I will now pass it to James, who's going to provide some grounding remarks for our session tonight. Thank you all again so much for being here. Passing it to you, James.
Thanks, Rachel. And thanks to everyone for joining us tonight for our webinar. I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to share some ideas and strategies with everyone. So I'm going to just describe a little bit of how we got here and what the process has been creating this zine that we're sort of celebrating tonight, the launch of it. I need to thank everyone who made this possible, particularly the folks from Community Justice Exchange who have recognized the importance of international solidarity and provided the resources to make this webinar happen. Special thanks go to Pilar Weiss, the executive director, and program director Rachel Ferran, plus the administrator Mary Strand, who's behind the scenes here making everything work. Lastly, though she is not in the webinar, I need to thank information artist Vic Liu for all the beautiful work she did to make the zine come alive. Second, I want to thank all 39 people that I interviewed for this project. They provided me with so many perspectives, shared so many experiences and insights, and reinforced my concern that we were missing out on the issue of international solidarity in our organizations. In getting ready for this event, I had the good fortune to review some of the stories and analyses that the folks shared with me. So I'd like to share a few of them with you to get you warmed up. I begin with the interview with Andrea James, the founder and executive director of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, an organization that is building their own global solidarity network. And in fact, you will hear 2 speakers tonight involved in that work. Andrea spoke about how being in a federal prison with women from around the world helped them build connections and come to the realization that, quote, all of the reasons that we were fighting for the liberation of women in this country were the same for the sisters in other countries. We wanted to connect and lift up our voices, which all goes really to the issue of capitalism, the oppression and control of Black people and poor people in the world. We wanted ourselves to take up space in that international discussion. end quote. Historian and activist Barbara Ransby, like a number of those interviewed, stressed that people in the US have a special role to play in both speaking out and in offering informed and strategic solidarity, as she labeled it. Since the US remains at the heart of the imperialist system, those of us who live here need to work to both build the power of our global networks and try to understand how living in the so-called belly of the beast impacts our own perspectives and political action. We need to avoid what Bill Ayers in his interview called narcissistic solidarity, meaning that we give ourselves as solidarity activists more attention and praise than the people fighting on the front line. A number of people also shared their own experience of working side by side with freedom fighters in various countries. Joel Geyer of the Socialist Workers' Party spent 5 years living in Portugal, working in support of the Popular Armed Forces movement that overthrew the dictatorship in 1974. There he witnessed amazing mass action where workers took over factories and tenants occupied apartment buildings. The insurgents failed to contest state power, but they put it on the agenda. Linda Evans went to Vietnam during the war as part of the Students for Democratic Society and met with women liberation fighters. She learned from the active role that women played in keeping the struggle and the population alive. For her, what she learned from those women was a life-changing experience that helped her see how undervalued and underutilized women were in the US movement. Puerto Rican activist Alfredo Lopez spoke about a rarely noted phenomenon, the racism against Puerto Ricans in the anti-Vietnam War movement that often drove him to organize separate anti-war delegations along racial lines. And migrant rights activist Maru Villalpando, who fled political violence in Mexico in the 1990s, recalled how people in so-called solidarity movements often confused providing services with the hard work of building political solidarity. And she noted that in the US, it's far easier to provide services than to build that solidarity. So those are just a few of the kind of tidbits of the commentary that people provided in the interviews, but hopefully this will spark a lot more discussion and reflection. For my part, I'm inspired to do this work for two reasons. First, I was a fugitive for 27 years and spent 18 of those years living in Southern Africa, working with unions and community groups as an educator. Those movements were organized beyond anything I had encountered in the US. And a key part of their program was international solidarity. I ran workshops for street cleaners and factory workers, for metal workers and bus drivers. But all these groups held international solidarity high on their list of political priorities. Although many of the workers did not have even a high school education, they were aware of the struggles of the Palestinian people, of the key issues in the British and US political arena, of the developments in the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, which would impact the sectors where they worked. This was part of their political power that enabled them to overthrow the apartheid regime. A lot of people in the US think it was the solidarity and the divestment movement that overthrew the apartheid regime. That solidarity played an important part, but the real power came from the ground up. Now we can save for another day the discussion as to why they have been unable to sustain that political power, but you can have to suspect it has something to do with the role of the United States and other imperialist countries. My second reason for wanting to push ahead with this project has to do with our enemies. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Trump-Musk regime, and there's a lot of them, is that they have a global plan. By contrast, most of our criminal justice reform organizations and even our abolitionist formations have been paying little attention to what happens outside the US. At times, we are overwhelmed, even depressed by it all. Steve Bannon's tactic of flooding the zone has surfaced an amazing array of global targets for action for the US regime. Apart from the obvious ones like China and Russia, they have brought surprises. Greenland, the Panama Canal, El Salvador, Argentina. Every week there is a new global maneuver being brought forward by these fascist oligarchs, annexing Greenland, making Canada the 51st state, seizing the Panama Canal, offering asylum to, of all people, white farmers from South Africa. Some of us have even chosen to stop following the news as if that's going to make the world better. In this way, our movements have partially let us down. While the far right has spent the last 4 years developing their Project 2025 global blueprint, the politics of most organizations on the left has become more narrow, more focused on single issues, often following agendas driven by funders, but paying little attention to developing a global strategy and building ties to organizations and comrades in other parts of the world. While we need to pace ourselves and engage in self-care to keep our strength for the long haul, as a strategy, withdrawal is not a solution. It drives us closer to the precipice. We need the power that comes from mobilizing, building organization, and expanding international solidarity. While the mobilization in response to the Gaza genocide has been an exception and very inspiring at times, we have a long way to go. People are rising up in their congressional districts, but we need a bigger vision. We need to continue to support Palestinian liberation. But when will we figure out how to transform our actions in ways that will help reverse the genocides taking place in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Sudan? How can we move to shutter the 40,000 person mega prison in El Salvador? And on a more positive note, how do we support the Sahel states after they have expelled France from their West African countries and are striving to build a Pan-African community? Addressing these international questions requires an organization that is aware of these questions and ready to take them on. I hope the zines and the discussions that come with them will play a small role in taking us down that road. I want to close this introduction by emphasizing that solidarity is multifaceted. Historically, solidarity has often taken the form of political resolutions or providing material or military aid to people involved in struggles for liberation. We must remember this history, but also remember that solidarity has other dimensions. To make this point, I want to read the answer that former political prisoner and organizer Laura Whitehorn gave me when I asked her for her definition of solidarity. Laura said, "Solidarity is your love that goes into fighting for justice, that extends beyond your own community, beyond your own national borders to others, and that you understand in your gut that no one will be free until everyone is free. And that you could have an economic, a political analysis of how that works. You could look at the similarities between the incarceration of women in Palestine and the incarceration of women in the United States and draw out all these similarities. But that every time you see one, you are talking about it as if you are talking about your own life." And this is the great line right here. "The feeling that you get when you see connections being made is like the joy of falling in love, the joy of winning something." Comrade Laura is reminding us that solidarity demands building different kinds of relationships than what we have done normally in this society. I hope we can keep this in mind as we move forward to build the power of our movements and organizations to resist. So a final update is that we have 2 more zines in progress, a zine based on a book chapter by Leanne Naidu, a Black queer feminist revolutionary from South Africa, who was part of a cohort of women who took a flotilla from South Africa to Palestine to deliver a boatload of aid for Palestinians. They were intercepted by the Israeli military. The zine highlights the subsequent events, and the difficult tensions based on race, class, national origin that emerged among the women during their incarceration, and the lessons these experiences offered for practicing international solidarity. Zine number 3 will be a detailed study of perhaps the most important solidarity movement of the second half of the 20th century, the movement in support of the struggle of the Vietnamese people against the imperialist US military. We look forward to sharing these with you and to further discussions on these vital questions. Stay tuned. I will hand this back over to Rachel to take us to Nathaniel to take us on our journey. Thanks for coming along.
All right, thanks, James. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All right, I'm so honored to introduce Nathaniel Moore. He's an archivist and co-director at the Freedom Archives. Nathaniel's been active in prisoner support work for the past decade and is the co-founder of an education program focusing on social justice inside of San Quentin State Prison. He's also active in a number of projects working to amplify international voices of resistance. I'm so glad you can be here, Nathaniel, to moderate our panel. I'll pass it over to you to start us off.
Thank you, Rachel. It's it's really nice to be here. And internationalism has played a large role in terms of my own political development and the work that I do. And so it's really exciting to be in this conversation, and I'm looking forward to introducing these panelists and getting it started. Just one piece of I guess like administrative reminder is if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A for the webinar. And I also just wanted to say thank you again to the interpreters who are doing this important work. I'm going to say one thing about the Freedom Archives and talk extremely briefly about our work, and then I'm going to introduce folks and get the conversation started. As Rachel mentioned, Freedom Archives is located in Berkeley, California, and we preserve social movement materials, both in the Bay Area, but from all over the world, mostly between the 1960s and the 1990s. One thing that we do a little bit different than most archives is, in addition to just preserving the materials, we want to actively repurpose them for educational purposes so that people are able to, and a lot of the conversation today is about this, but draw connections, inspiration, analysis, and vision from the work that these folks did in the past that can nourish us and propel us into the future. So again, this fits very well into the product that James has created, and excited to talk about it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and introduce the 3 panelists who will, alongside with James, kind of be our conversation, and then we'll jump in. So I'd first, and I'm going to do all 3 of the introductions before we actually get to the folks. So I'm going to start by introducing Dawn Harrington, who is the Executive Director of Free Hearts and Special Projects Manager for the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, in which she helps to coordinate the international network of formerly incarcerated women. During her incarceration, Ms. Harrington was disturbed by the impact of incarceration on families, especially women and children, and inspired to make a difference upon her release. Dawn Harrington does local, state, national, and international abolitionist work led by women and girls. I'm now going to introduce Toni Tulloch, who is the international organizer consultant for the International Network of Formerly Incarcerated Women, a global movement spanning over 25 countries on 6 continents, and it's committed to abolishing incarceration for women and girls. Toni spent over 16 years in the US federal prison system, before being deported to Jamaica. She's an author, publisher, and advocate who is using her lived experiences to amplify the voices silenced by injustice. And finally, I would like to introduce Robert Saleem Holbrook, who is the executive director of the Abolitionist Law Center. Saleem is a former juvenile lifer who served 27 years in Pennsylvania's adult state prisons, including a total of 10 years in solitary confinement, after being sentenced to life without parole as a 16-year-old. While incarcerated, Saleem studied liberation movements and was mentored by older political and politicized prisoners. Following his release in 2018, Saleem immediately joined the Abolitionist Law Center staff, launching its organizing arm in his native city of Philadelphia and helping to lead its efforts to end death by incarceration, which is another way to talk about life without parole sentences, and solitary confinement before becoming the executive director in 2020. So a webinar is not the best way to engage a full conversation, but we are going to endeavor to do the best we can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pose a question to the panelists. I'll maybe request that one of you start off. And then from there, we'll do the best we can to just kind of move it around and all answer the question. And I will just very, very mildly in the background, if we're starting to get to time, start making some signal or do something to try to move us along. And we'll just make it work. So I'm excited to hear from all these folks. Dawn, if you don't mind, we're going to start with you. And the first question that we're all gonna then talk about is, what work have we done in the field or in international solidarity, and why is that important to us?
Thank you so much. So I am, as you said in the intro, with the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. And like several years ago now, we started, and it was through Coletta Younger. She was at Washington Office on Latin America. She started bringing our executive director, Andrea James, to a couple of different events. And then I started being able to go to some of them. And most of them were in Latin America at the time. And so we were going to like Mexico, to Argentina, we went to Brazil, we went to a couple of other places. And I think I always remember at one of the time when it really hit me was when I was in Mexico. And well, first of all, the trip began with Andrea. Somebody was supposed to be getting in the car with her, and then when she said she was from the United States, like she just like started backing away and like basically almost ran away from the car because they were getting picked up by the same vehicle. And that was the beginning of this trip. And she was from Bolivia and had, a situation with the United States government that was on her lands at the time. And so basically, she also, just really did this impassionate plea at the event that we was at about what she wanted to do to the United States government. And everybody was like cheering and screaming. And it was something that was different for me about this trip because I mean, just being honest, I wasn't very politically educated on the topic. But this particular time was a real turning point for me because, and this is a little embarrassing to say at this time, but I'm gonna just be real about it. That evening when we was at dinner, one of our sisters, she was from Cuba, and she was talking about, basically how her grandparents were in the revolution and they became doctors. And it's so embarrassing. I was like, wait a minute, isn't Castro a dictator or something? And she was like, no, honey, let me explain it all to you, And I think it was something about that next morning. And it was something about that next morning where everything that I had experienced so far really hit me. It was like the different art that I had seen, the different things that people had said, the different music, and going to these different places and just realizing like all of the stuff that our country had did in the name of God and country. And I just was like, I really just cried and cried that morning. I almost missed my flight. I was just crying, just grieving about, and just really like doubled down my commitment, really made a strong commitment to doing what, it takes to help build out, this international. It started off just an international commission, but it has progressed. So since then, a little bit after that, we were able to kind of pull together a convening of what we said was the three Americas. It was Canada, it was United States, and it was Latin America. And one thing that we realized within that is like, no matter what context we were in, no matter what side of the border we were on, we shared a lot of our stories, just shared a lot of similarity, and it just helped us to start thinking about what this could look like. And then we started being like, well, you know, what about Africa? What about Asia? What about Europe? What about the other continents? And so now basically actually last year in Bogota we had our first like international convening, and now we are over 25 countries across 6 continents. Argentina, Australia, Bahamas, Brazil, Canada, Cambodia, Chile, uh, Colombia, Dominican Republic, Ghana, El Salvador, Jamaica, Haiti, Indonesia, Ireland, Kenya, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Nigeria, Philippines, Sierra Leone, South Africa, Spain, Tanzania, Thailand, Uganda, UK, United States, and Zambia. And we're all really just building together, really just trying to end the incarceration of women and girls. And yeah, it's been an amazing experience. Like, yeah, like even for example, going to Haiti on a vacation, and I was like asking like, where are the formerly incarcerated women? And then I'm able. We don't even we don't speak the same language, but I was able to have somebody interpret and show them all the stuff that we were doing, and now their organization is growing. And so, yeah, we're just getting started, but we've been able to build a whole lot in a short amount of time.
Thank you so much for that. Toni, do you want to pick that up?
Yes, I do. Don and I we work hand in hand, and we're part of just this larger community of formerly incarcerated women. My experiences started with the International Solidarity Movement in prison while I was doing my 16 years in prison. Being in a U.S. Federal prison, it's an international movement because there are women from all over the world there. So that was my first introduction into that atmosphere. And being in the belly of the beast, you needed to know but you needed just that bond. You needed that connection to be able to make it. So it wasn't any different because it basically was us against them. So that's where my first experience with solidarity internationally began. And through that led me to what I'm doing now. Because during that prison time, I met Danielle Metz, who introduced me to the international network of formerly incarcerated women, which I am the organizer. And doing that work, I am in contact on a daily basis with women all over the globe. And what Don says is like, and also the quote that James read earlier, when you find that network, maybe it's not the exact, but I think you guys understand what I'm saying. When you find that connection of solidarity, you know it. It's like falling in love. And it's like something that you know that you you feel like it's something that you were always missing. For me, um, also being deported back to Jamaica, my native country, it even broadens that more. It even broadens that sense of solidarity more internationally because I'm within a community of 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 women that have been through it, that have been sent back to countries that they don't know, that have to start from the ground up, that have no sense of nothing. And so working within the network of the international community of women, I see that their struggles are, like Dawn mentioned, it's all the same. There's so many similarities. At this point, right now, within the global movement, everyone is struggling. Everyone is trying to figure out their way. Everyone is trying to figure out their path. And me being in there and just trying to help them and also trying to help myself figure out learning from them, that's a bigger, even bigger part of understanding that no, we cannot do it alone. We cannot do this. It takes one and then one and then one and then one, and we grow and we build and we learn from one another. Sometimes I'm up at 10, 11 at night talking to these, different women in various countries, and I don't feel tired because it's like I hear them. I hear them and I feel it in my heart. I feel the passion of what they're trying to do, the changes they're trying to make. So I love my work. I love my work. And each and every day even though I just formally started as the international organizer for the International Network of Formerly Incarcerated Women in January, I feel like I've been doing this forever because, like I mentioned before, it started before this. That was just my preparation. That was just my experience to be prepared to be in this position at this time, at this very moment that is needed.
Thank you for that. I want to in a while, I want to actually come back to the idea of how we're talking to so many different people in different places and the strategies we use to make that accessible and get everybody on board to thinking about things I guess just I don't want to use like translate, but just translating those ideas. So I do want to come back to some of that. Thank you. Saleem, I want to move to you and hear from your perspective about the work you do and the importance of it.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you everyone for, sharing your perspectives on this subject. For me, international solidarity really goes a ways back. I came up in a very fierce anti-apartheid household as a kid. And I could also remember when I was younger, my mother was a part of a union, and after I would get off of school, I would have to walk to my mother's office and wait there for her to get off of work because we didn't have childcare. And then we would go sometimes to her union meetings that were, down on Spring Garden. And I remember being in those meetings, and I was young, but I remember all the anti-apartheid posters. I remember the posters from the Nicaragua supporting the Sandinistas. However, it wasn't until I was in prison that I really was able to put together what I was seeing on those union walls, and that's when I was mentored by political prisoners like Russell Maroon Schultz, Fred Muhammad Burton, Joseph Jojo Bowens, Jafar Saidi. These were men who were members of the Black Liberation Army and Black Panther Party. And so they had a very explicit internationalist perspective that really put me on the path to just learning about Amilcar Cabral, Thomas Sankara, the Latin American liberation struggles, the South African liberation struggles. And that has really reflected itself in a lot of my work, that I still maintain the importance of international solidarity and class struggle, even though we live in a world today that now more than ever we need internationalism and we need class solidarity, but we seem not to have it. We seem to live in a space where um, um, those politics are blurred, and I don't know. I think it would be a longer conversation just to talk about the impact of the collapse of the Soviet Union, of the socialist blocs around the world, and then globalism stepping in. But now, in terms of our work today, it frames a lot of our work. One of the strongest pieces of international solidarity work that we're doing today um, is around Palestine, which is probably the preeminent um, um, internationalist issue on the world stage. And that work that we're doing right now is we're uh, bringing attention, and also probably exploring avenues of litigation with uh, the Abolitionist Law Center, Center for Constitutional Rights, around private corporations that have allowed the Israeli military, has enabled the Israeli military to use AI technologies in the targeting and killing of Palestinian civilians in Palestine. Um, Essentially, it's basically controlling their targeting lists. And all of this is pretty much done through Microsoft Cloud and Google Cloud and many of these other platforms that are where we're probably using this Zoom meeting for right now. So for us, we really wanted to engage in this struggle, but we also wanted to really be strategic and measured in how we engaged in this struggle to make an impact on what's happening. And that, again, that is driven from our international solidarity with the Palestinian struggle, that also hasn't just started in the last 15 or 20 years. There's been a long history of solidarity between Black and brown people in Palestine. The first Black Panther internationalist chapter was the former Palestinian embassy in Algiers that they turned over in Algeria, that they turned over to the Black Panther Party in the early 70s and late 60s. In the present day Gaza Strip, there was a armed unit of the Palestinian Liberation Army that was called the Black Panthers, that they were inspired by the Black Panthers. So there's a long history of solidarity between Black and brown liberation movements, not just in the United States, but around the world, and the Palestinian people. And so we look at ourselves as continuing that legacy, because at the end of the day, this legacy is about freedom. This legacy is about human rights. This legacy is about self-determination under the United Nations International Human Rights Charter. And when we came out and supported the Palestinian right to self-determination and armed struggle, when government electeds came at us, and even some people in the movement spaces came at us from being so explicit, we said, well, if you have a problem with that, change the UN's charter, because it grants people those rights. But we also believe that those rights are inherent, and those rights aren't granted by any government entity. So those are some issues that really motivated us. I think it was in the founding of the Abolitionist Law Center's DNA that we would be internationalists. I just think that for us, we just have to really measure and gauge our entry point into internationalist struggles to see where we can actually make an impact.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all for that. I just want to highlight a couple things that I was hearing, because I don't really get to talk. So that's my job as a moderator, and I get to just randomly take some space. I really appreciate the aha moments that that we have, that allow us to understand that, to deepen our connections that we're making. I know just in my own life, in my household growing up, I was very lucky to know about African colonization and liberation, the histories of lots of places all over the world. But one thing that Freedom Archives, and when I came here, I really didn't know anything about the Puerto Rican liberation struggle or the independence movement there. And that was something that would have made sense that I would have known about given its proximity to the United States, but again, poses just these aha moments to allow one to make these connections and integrate all these struggles as one, even though, of course, they're all unique. So I just want to raise up the everyone needs their aha moments to as we develop. Everyone on this call I know has had them. I really appreciate the reciprocity with some of the relation building so that it's not transactional, but that we can offer solidarity to people, and people can offer solidarity to us. And actually that exchange is both beautiful and important in of itself. So I really appreciated that piece. And then I'm also thinking about the power of visuals, right? With this, a lot of these issues are really deep and dense, and people need time to work their way through them and make connections. But to Saleem's point, just in fact seeing the visuals of some of these connections and political movements stick with people so that even if they don't understand every part of the struggle at any given moment, it just provides this fabric with which people can kind of start putting things together. And then as the puzzle starts coming together, it all kind of fits. So I just really appreciate folks bringing some of these important things together. I think for our next question as we go around, I would like to talk a little bit about, given that we're doing international work with people from different cultures, different languages, different political systems, different legacies and histories, how do we have these conversations where we're taking on these really dynamic and global systems, but having these conversations in a way where we're relating to people and we're actually starting it where people can engage and start to move forward. So I'd be interested to hear our perspectives on that. And James, I don't know if you get to talk during this part, but if you would like to share your perspective on that, I know you have something to say about it. So maybe Toni, would you like to start us off on this one, and then we'll go around?
Yes. In this area, it's with the language barrier, it's just a technique of just trying to find commonality. You know, for me, what works is listening, listening to the impassionate things that is being said. And once you're listening and you're feeling the emotions, the language really isn't a barrier, because at the same time, it's like a person's impassionate plea about things that they just feel so strongly about, it come across in the emotion. And so with the language barrier, as far as for myself, sometimes, the woman that I may be speaking to, the English is not that good, but they get their points across. They if it's not just in words, they will make signs, or they'll send things in text that brings across their point and the things that they're trying to say. So I think in not only that, but just within this ANI and technology age that we're in, that works a lot. That helps a lot too, because everything is in interpretation. But I know that into with AI, it doesn't bring across the emotions, but yet it does get those barriers. So I don't feel like in this time and age that we're in, that the language barrier should be any type of issue in any sense at all. Because when everyone's goal is the same and everyone is moving in the same direction and everyone is trying to achieve just basically the same thing, whether or not it's in a different culture, a different language, different situations, it's all going to come together and come across. Um, like I said, at the onset, my whole method that I use is listening. I try to listen keenly. And if it's something that I don't feel that I'm capable of communicating, I'll take a day, I'll take 2 days, and then I will figure it out and sort it out and try to get the best understanding, get others within our community involved. Because that's one thing about being in a large network with so many people from, so many women from so many different countries, you can get different perspective of things. And there within our network, there are women that have been involved within this movement for decades, that have experienced different ways of dealing with barriers. And it's like the language, the cultures, the borders, it never stops it. It never prevents it, because it's like it's the common goal that just keep us moving and keep us building and keep us growing to where we have better understanding that it's our common goal to get this done. It's our common goal to keep fighting. It's our common goal to keep tearing down the walls. It's our common goal that we all have a common enemy at this point. The bigger part of the picture is at this point. We all have a common enemy. And if we don't unite to come against that enemy, then we're going to be nothing. We're going to be nothing. So it's like within our cultures, we have to find the similarities. We have to find the things in the common thread that bonds us together to unite us in this global solidarity to be able to come against and defeat this common enemy that is trying to abolish us and demolish us.
Thank you. Saleem or Don, do you want to pick this up?
Sure. I think that when it comes to international solidarity, there has to be a commitment to political education. And for me, oftentimes I found that easier said than done in terms of as an organization, right? But also, I also believe that I tell people if you're looking for a revolution in a 501c nonprofit space, then you're delusional. You're somewhere else. So this does have to happen somewhere outside of the nonprofit space. But I do think that we could be better at bringing attention to international causes and international solidarity in these spaces. I would say that one thing I realized though in the past year and a half is that if there's been any toolkit that has contributed to, I wouldn't say the rise of political education, but I would say the rise of political awareness, because there's a difference, political awareness and political education. There's been no better motivator or toolkit than the war crimes and genocide in Gaza. I think that has been a generational shift in political awareness in this country. I could say anytime you have 18, 19-year-olds who are identifying with the Palestinian movement, who are identifying with the Palestinian struggles to such an extent that they had to basically shut down TikTok and, threaten to shut down TikTok and force its sale because it was completely shifting a narrative. Now the question is, do we have the containers for that shift? And I don't think we have. And I think that is where organizations, my political education came about from being in a prison cell for 27 years and solitary confinement for 10 years. I've struggled out here to find a way to shift that out here when there's no alternative. And we do have to create the alternative. And rather, I would say there are alternatives, but I think that we have to create the containers better for those alternatives. But also the other thing too is, man, and this is real, like political education is hard when your base is just scrapping day to day to survive. So that's another thing. You know, a lot of our family members have loved ones in prison. A lot of our folks are working 2 or 3 jobs. And it's hard, as crazy as it sounds, for them to devote some time to read about Amilcar Cabral, to read about international solidarity. So I think that it's going to take a commitment out of us, but also I think it's going to take it. We need a movement in this country that has an internationalist perspective. And we need to figure out a way to build that movement. And then more importantly, we need to figure out a way that that movement can be built outside of the nonprofit 50c3 spaces, because that's not the space that a revolution or a change is going to happen in.
Thanks for that. Dawn, please.
Yeah, sure. I would say that you know, for us it's really been about like the starting place is connecting from the unity of experience and um and starting from there. And I do think that there is some levels of different political awareness when we come into the spaces. Like I know we had a huge debate when we were in Bogota because it, you know, I think, you know, some of our sisters, for example, that are in Latin America were a lot more politically educated than some of the other places as well. And, um, you know, there being some, um, you know, it causing like us to have a debate and to really, I think that part of that though, it has sharpened like all of us to be in this, you know, and to be in an international movement. And whereas if one, just like with me, you know, if we're connecting on the level of experience, we have the language, you know, everywhere, every time we have the translation, 8, 9 languages, however we need to do so that we can actually communicate with each other. And then, you know, the other part is just not like, you know, canceling the folks that ain't as far along, but really for us to build as a unit together. Because I think that was a big part of kind of like some of the debates in Bogota is like, okay, you know, just the different levels of how people are politically educated and there being some tension around that. Um, but I think what we all understand very deeply is our experiences and how we've been impacted by it. And that kind of being that entry point to where we can then commit to each other as a first thing. And then from there, like commit to, you know, being politically educated to, you know, communally figuring out like to learning and being willing to do it because we're committed to each other and because we share this experience, kind of being that way. I hope that is helpful.
Thank you. What everyone is saying is helpful. So certainly there's no question about that. This is just a very gentle reminder for all of us as we're for the last 30 minutes to just slow down just a little bit for translation. You're all good. Thank you so much. James, I'm going to throw it to you for a moment.
Okay, I don't want to talk for a long time, but I think, I mean, people are talking about language, and I don't think we can say language isn't a barrier. I think there's a necessity to recognize that English is the language of imperialism, right? That English speakers are privileged and they have power in international situations so often. And so I think I know we can overcome these barriers, but for example, living in South Africa, there's 11 official languages. So there's a hierarchy of those languages, and English speakers have more power because they can use that language, it's the international language, than some of the other local languages. So that I think it's just something we need to be aware of. How do we learn to express, if we're monolingual in only English, how do we learn to express ourselves in other languages? And how do we have the humility to recognize that it's often really difficult for people to spend a whole day in a workshop having to work through an interpreter as opposed to being able to listen to everybody speaking in their mother tongue. So I just think it's something we need to acknowledge if we're going to build international solidarity.
Thanks, James. Does anyone want to respond to that before this is my effort at doing the best conversational webinar we can. And if not, yeah, okay, cool. I'll just kind of we'll throw a couple observations out there. And then one thing I do want to talk about, we're not close to running out of time, but one thing I definitely want to talk about before we run out of time is kind of like projecting forward and thinking about how do we build these solid containers to hold these things and what strategies and how to actually get this work done. I really appreciate the unity of experience and the finding commonalities and the listening. I think that is key to how we move forward, as well as the reflection that political awareness and political education are not the same thing. One thing that I just want to share from a Freedom Archives perspective in terms of some of the cultural challenges or just also these kind of aha moments in terms of the reciprocity piece. Freedom Archives was very lucky to be able to travel to Palestine on a delegation that was focused on political imprisonment. And one of the things that sticks with me about that, this was coming up to almost 10 years ago at this point. But one thing that really sticks with me about the translation piece outside of language. So one thing for the generally speaking American-born delegation of folks that were there, one thing that was perhaps a little bit of new for us was the idea that, in terms of experiential at least, the idea of 3 of 5 male Palestinians will be incarcerated at some time during their life. So that statistic is kind of shocking on its face, even for over-policed communities in the United States. On the other side, when we would talk about mass incarceration, Palestinians, even despite that statistic and the role that incarceration plays in their lives, were astounded that there were 2.2 to 2.4 million people in the United States that were behind bars. For them, that was a statistic that was just mind-blowing, right? And so so we both have these deep experiences with incarceration, but they actually manifest a little bit differently in the day-to-day. And so part, I think, of that reciprocity and learning work is how to translate that these systems might manifest differently or might function a little bit differently, but the existence of them is the same and they are all connected to each other. And so I think sometimes one of the ways in which we spoke to try to split these differences was actually by using the commonality of experiences and sharing statements with political prisoners in the United States or folks who are locked up with Palestinians and having them cross-translated so that we could share also with American or US-based political prisoners what prospective Palestinians were thinking about. But to James's point, I do think that there is some work that has to go into what the translation kind of is, even with clearly most of the people in the world are experiencing the wrong side of some of these systems and can totally relate to that piece. So I've got a couple questions in the chat that I see, but maybe to kind of end our official question and answer period, I want to go back to all the different panelists and I want us to kind of imagine uh, what are we doing, or what can we do to advance international solidarity in our movements? So James kind of framed what brought us all together is we're all representing organizations that are trying to do that work. So it would be great to flesh that out and talk about kind of what we see in the future for that work. And then thinking about some of what I've seen in the chat, if folks also want to connect um, kind of what our goals for building this solidarity looks like. That could be a strategic goal or something beyond like the connectivity. So I'm just going to kind of throw some of those things on the table. And if folks want to pick those up, that would be great. And maybe Saleem, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. I mean, for me, it's always about the praxis. So, um, for us, we look to um, politically educate people by fighting for the issue and alongside the people who the issue impact. And so, if that's the case of Palestine, um, we look at to it as a way to one to bring people to political awareness around what's going on in Palestine, but then two, use it as an opportunity to do political education. Like I said, why is it important that we fight for the rights of the Palestinian people? And you know, not just the Palestinian people, but international solidarity, period. So what we try and do is connect um, political education with the issue that we're fighting for. And that just doesn't apply to Palestine. That applies to mass incarceration, policing, decarceration, abolition. So just to, you know, not to take up too much more time, we feel as though that's the best way that our entry point into the conversation about political education can be done, by using our work to raise the political awareness and to raise the political education of the people that are involved in our work or part of our movement.
Toni or Don, do either of you want to say something about this?
I could go next. I think it's important to just note that we are in the twilight of empire, and and because of that, like it's a moment of like increase and unprecedented repression, but then also of revolutionary possibility. And so with the rise of global fascism, and the desperate, you know, last stand of colonial capitalism, it's intensified the war of on marginalized communities all around the world. Um, with the for example, the withdrawal of United States aid, like I didn't think about, because our sister organizations, a lot of them, they're not funded by United States aid directly, but indirectly, like this has had a huge impact on them, all around the world, like this, like in a matter of a snap. And that's what we see a lot of too, is like, even before this, um the unit after the 2004 coup in Haiti, the United States and the West basically built mass incarceration from scratch in Haiti. Like the United States built 3 prisons in Haiti, Canada built 1. And since then they had basically they didn't have mass incarceration, and we shouldn't be we're exporting United States style like incarceration. We shouldn't be telling anybody how to do incarceration. We know we're the worst in the world, and yet, like for example, when we started seeing, oh, now the rise of private prisons coming into other countries as well. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, the birthplace of the global private prison industry. And as in the United States, we're seeing more pushback. We're seeing it push out into other countries. And so it is, yeah, it's all, the more that we're pushing back, the more that this is on its last stand, the more desperate that it's becoming. And so but I think that there's a lot of possibility when it comes to this. Um, when empires crumble, when they're crumbling, liberation movements rise. And, we're a part of that legacy. So I think it's very important for us to understand that, um, the division, the empire wants us to be divided. That's how they win. You know what I mean? They're going to win if we're divided. And so our movements, we have to really bridge those divides. And, it's urgent because the old world is dying. And so it's like, what are we birthing? We got to be the midwives to bring in that new world. And so we have to make a choice. You know, will we just watch it fall and let whatever new thing just gets recreated in its place? Or are we going to fight for the future that we want? And if so, then we're going to have to do it together.
Thank you. Thanks, Toni.
Yes, I totally also agree with what Don is saying. It's a new horizon. It's a new horizon for them because their neo-colonialism is vibrant. So it has to be a new horizon for us on this frontier. We have to push. We have to keep on building on the foundations that we've laid so far. It's a relentless fight, and there are times I'm sure we get weary and frustrated. We get overwhelmed by the division. Like Saleem mentioned, the organizations that it's just the status quo of doing what organizations do. And the grassroots problems, the grassroots issues, those are being ignored. So it's important for us, the grassroots, to continue to push, continue to build, continue, to learn from our mistakes, continue to unite because divided we fall, divided we fall, and they understand that. So we can't be divided. We cannot be divided. We may not completely know what the goal of international solidarity is, but we can continue just to build in areas that we see, that we feel, and that we're uniting. As James mentioned before about language barriers, trust me, I know about language barriers being in a country currently where I don't speak the language, but it's my desire to fit in. It's my desire to learn the language. And it's like when you want something and it's important to you, you push, you push. And this is what as long as we want this, as long as we want unity and solidarity, so we won't be overran by the powers that are and that is trying to take us out, then we continue to push, we continue to build, we continue to grow, we continue to try to understand, we continue to do the things that Saleem mentioned, we continue to, when we can, educate ourselves. That's a short coming with this generation. They don't like to read. Everything is within the 20-second gratification. Okay, so we have to learn to understand that. We have to find ways to reach them because shutting them out is not going to help. They're the one that's going to pick up the baton, and they're the one who's going to continue to run this marathon. As far as for what we're doing now, we're building the foundation for them. We can't stop because if we stop, what are they gonna have? If we give up and just say, well, it's, we don't understand what it is. We don't have any, they're not listening to whatever. What are they going to have? So even if we don't see any significant changes within what we're doing now, at least we're doing something to give them to have a foundation to at least build on. Because if we don't do it for the next generation, who is? Who is going to do it? So overall, our goal is for that, because if they're going to continue to do the things that they're doing now, if they're going to be There are going to be thousands and thousands and probably millions of people that are incarcerated if they continue to follow their plan. I just recently saw something about where they're trying to pull all the doctors and the Cuban doctors out of so-called third world countries that's been there helping them for years and years. That I, being from Jamaica, I know during COVID, if we did not have the Cuban doctors there to assist us, we I don't know what we would have done. But now they're using the withdrawal of US visa from these countries as like the bait to get them to stop to I guess basically deport the Cuban doctors from their country, stating that it's funding human trafficking. But it just goes to show you that how they can take words and misconstrue them and take situations because they're not in the positions of suffering. They're not in the positions of need. They're not in the position of want. So it's easy for them to take these situations that people do. They know these governments from these countries. They know that they depend on these visas to get across borders. So they're using that as a manipulative tool to get them to yield and bend to the injustices that they continuously do. And so, as far as just like grow and international solidarity, we need to look just past just one thing and just and limit ourselves. As far as in my case, I know what it's like to be a migrant. I know what it's like to be deported, and I know what it's like to be incarcerated. And within those three, I felt everything. I felt all the pains and different. You know, I felt in all three when I was released from incarceration and I was put on that plane to be deported to my country. I know what it felt in that same instant. It was no different. I know what it felt to be subhuman, to be handcuffed and shackled on a plane. So it's like, let's reach across the aisle. Let's try to, find the commonality even amongst the differences and get this done and get it done and get it done. At least just, even if it's just a little, even if it's just a little.
Thank you so much for that. I want maybe I want to just end with is thanking everyone, all the speakers for their perspectives and their really important reflections. I know this is being recorded, and I'm happy because I think that there's a lot of richness here that people can go back and engage. Kind of the last thing I'll say from my perspective is I really also just want to name the deep legacy of internationalism in our left movements, that I don't think I need to convince anyone on this call that that's true, but that helps me know that I'm fitting into something that has existed long before I showed up on this earth and will continue to exist long after I'm gone. And that also gives me connectivity with people that are both on the planet as well as people who have already passed, that we're all part of this thing that exists. So that's something that is important to me. And I think in addition to James's work, where there's we can delve into it and find additional places to find information and education. I'll also just say that if folks want to visit search.freedomarchives.org, there's plenty of materials that are freely downloadable and one can engage. That's all about internationalism and global movements. So if for folks are trying to find their place to start, that is one place that folks could start. I'm going to go ahead and throw it back to James for maybe last comments and any announcements or anything.
Okay. Thank you, Nathaniel, and thanks so much to everyone. I think we just scratched the surface of this, really. We weren't in this little bit of time with all the wisdom and experience on this panel. I think we just started. Is everybody okay if we stay for another 2 hours? But I think there has to be a next time. There has to be further conversations. I wanted to say a couple things about, I mean, Tony's just making the point about building unity, building power together. And I think, and Dawn talking about the crumbling of an empire. I mean, these people, they're flexing their muscles, they're being aggressive because they know they're on the run. But a lot of our folks are overwhelmed by this, and it's those of us who have this experience and this kind of understanding have to be able to find a way to come together and build that unity and build programs of education. I mean, Saleem's talking about young people being ready to shut down TikTok because of their actions. How do we create educational vehicles, educational processes that build the kind of analysis that we need people to have, the kind of understanding? And I think one other piece that I wanted to just put out there is that we need to also be connecting with other sectors of the population that are being marginalized by the crumbling of empire. It's not just formerly incarcerated folks. That's who we primarily identify with. But there's unhoused people. There's people that are going to be losing their medical benefits. There's schools that are going to be shut down or under resourced. All of those are populations that can be mobilized into political power. So I think that's what's the purpose of internationalism? The purpose of internationalism is to build international political power. And as Nathaniel has said, there's a history of this, but that history isn't known to people. That history's been kind of erased, except for those of us who are kind of nerdy and study it or have been impacted by it directly. But it's not really on the agenda for most people. So how do we do that? We tried to create this zine. We created this zine as one vehicle for doing that, and we hope that you'll share that and circulate it. But there's many other ways. You can look at the Freedom Archives. You can look at other resources in your own community to help develop this understanding and build that political power that we need. And I'll stop there. I'm sure somebody's got a few other things that they want to squeeze in there in the last couple of minutes, but I really just appreciate everyone's reflections on this, and I think it was amazingly powerful and amazingly short.
Well, James, I just want to extend my congratulations to you in regards to your zine. And I want to thank you for the opportunity that you afforded me to be on your platform. I feel honored and I really, really enjoyed this. And I just look forward to doing more of these with you.
Thank you. But we are the people that are honored to have you here. Let's get that straight.
Thank you.
I just have a question, James. What's going to be the next zine? What's going to be the title of the next one?
Okay, the next zine is the story of the women's flotilla from South Africa to Palestine, and what happened in that amongst the women that were there when they confronted the Israeli military and they were incarcerated, and how the Israeli military, how they were divided by race, by national origin, and so forth, and the lessons that has for us in terms of how we build solidarity and unity. And the woman that told this story, is a queer Black revolutionary from South Africa. So it's through her eyes that we experience this. But I mean, we're also open to ideas. We need to do whatever we can. Ideas about things to write. We want to make these things accessible to people, because as we've said, as Toni has said, people don't read. We can write a 400-page book on this, but it'll just be us that'll read it, right? So we have to find ways to popularize this. So Saleem, if you got ideas, Dawn, you got ideas, Toni, you got ideas, Nathaniel, you got ideas? Share them and let's build.
Yeah, I just want to just say, since we have a couple minutes left, just yeah, I really appreciated the zine format for the exact reasons that we've said, and it's just so beautiful. Um, yeah, it makes me think about, oh, we could do some games or just all of the different things that we can do to just really spread this out. And I hope that everyone that came today will spread it out around. Use it to educate within your own organizations as well. And maybe we can have some, study groups or something like that that come out of this. Who knows? But I just really appreciate everyone for being here today. I agree, James. The conversation could have went so much longer, but you know, maybe we have to, leave some for next time. So, just really, really excited about the scene and bringing it back. And maybe, another thing is maybe we can get it in some other languages so that we can have some groups um, with our sister organizations as well. So if we can get it into some of the other languages, that would be awesome.
It's being translated into Spanish at the moment, so it'll be in Spanish. We also are trying to get this inside. We have some connections to take it inside, particularly to study groups that exist inside the prisons, because we want, it to reach that population, and that's a priority for us. So if you have vehicles to make that happen, please let us know.
Are we good with final words, or James, anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Feel like I've had my say here. I think I'd like to hear from Saleem. You got a closer
we
for
got
us?
No, I just say, man, this was wonderful. Being back in, I feel like every now and then in this nonprofit space, you need to be grounded. And sometimes you could get away from um, those pillars that propped you up, even in the darkest places. But also, I think that this is something that is really needed at this moment because, this thing, we ain't looking into the abyss. We falling, head first into it. And, the empire has had its time, is crumbling. And either you're going to get swept down river or you're going to know how to build your ark. And that's what political education is going to do for us. So I really appreciate this. I hope that this is the beginning of many flowers blossoming throughout the empire. So, thanks for attending and look, for all of us that are on this call, not just those on the webinar, because I see some major political theorists and practitioners and veterans on this call. This is for all of us to figure out and start our networks, right where we're at. When we was inside the prison camps, we used to say like liberated territory, doesn't have to be Cuba, Angola, it starts right under your feet. My cell was a liberated territory because when you came in that cell, whether you was a guard or a prisoner, you had to respect who I was. You had to respect my politics because it was going to be on right then and there. And that's what we have to start doing right in our community. So, we don't have to travel all around the world for international solidarity. Let's start building that solidarity here at home while also having a global perspective that it's going to take all of us to bring this global beast down.
so powerful and such a powerful note to end on. Thank you so much, Saleem and Dawn and Toni and Nathaniel, and of course, James. Thanks to our interpreters, Spanish language and ASL, and thanks to everyone for being here tonight. More conversations needed, more work on this needed. We'll be in touch. Thanks again, everybody.
All right.